by 7.5% last year, India's income rose by an amount higher than the total income of Portugal, Norway, or Denmark during that same year. So this is the equivalent of adding a rich country's economy in a poor one, and doing so in a single year. And of course, the consequences of that growth are substantially increased rates of consumption. All of this adding to Friedman's Brave New World that is hot, flat, and crowded. Now, I want to use these examples as a way of introducing my primary theme for the day, which is the role and responsibility of the 21st Century Research University in addressing the causes and the consequences of these occurrences. But I want to further set the stage by talking for just a moment about an issue that drives much of what I've been referring to at this point, the issue of global climate change. Most certainly a major factor in our understanding the crises that I'm referring to, and something that was recently described as the signature crisis that threatens our entire planet. I have learned from people who are much brighter and much more informed on these matters than I that global climate change is less about warming and more about extremes, including extreme disruptions. The term climate basically refers to a set of statistics that describe weather environments over time, not simply average weather, as is sometimes suggested. One such statistic is variability, and others extremes. Together, these statistics quantify a disruptive potential to the world's weather. An interesting way to think about this issue, particularly for a non-expert like me, is to think of it in the context of two widely used terms, global warming and climate change. This creates an at once amusing but rather sobering tale that was recently shared with me by Rob Gillis, a climatologist and a member of my faculty. The person who initially argued for the use of the term climate change as opposed to global warming was not a scientist at all, but a political consultant. In a 2002 memo to President George Bush, Frank Luntz argued that the term climate change doesn't sound nearly as frightening to the public as does the term global warming. Its adoption, he thought, would soften the topic and thereby make it more politically neutral. Now, ironically, the scientific community quickly picked up on this term, saying, you know, he's right. We should be talking about climate change, but for a different reason. Specifically, as these scientists knew, when you change the temperature, as is occurring with massive emissions of carbon into the atmosphere, everything else in the climate system changes as well. This includes specifically, and most importantly, the intensity and variability of the hydrologic cycle. These changes lead in turn to the development of weather extremes. Now, the physics of this tells us that a warmer atmosphere will result in more intense extremes, suggesting again that the current headlines that we read about, record flooding, tornadoes, and drought, are happening as our planet heats up. The most frightening part of this is that extreme weather disasters will only become more frequent and more severe unless something is done. So the most accurate way to speak of what is happening then is to acknowledge that anthropogenic-caused global warming is leading to climate change. As Tom Windsor, a self-described ex-climate change agnostic, puts it, we aren't just talking about the effects of a butterfly flapping its wings, but an unprecedented release of carbon, upsetting Earth's sensitive climate of long-term weather patterns. These changes are contributing to more extreme fluctuations from the norm and greater occurrences of extreme weather. Windsor concludes, my own study of uncertainty in weather forecasting led me to more certainty that the Earth is indeed entering into a phase of dramatic climate change. Thus, as a result, increasingly extraordinary and extreme weather patterns are becoming and will become more and more prevalent. Heavier rains, stronger floods, longer droughts, more severe tornadoes and hurricanes. So far from softening the topic, the effort at political correctness has only made it vividly more menacing. Now, certainly we all understand that weather extremes exist in the climate record on a variety of timescales, but as Dermeyer has recently noted, we are witnessing on many fronts the signature of human-influenced global warming. Now, of course, if we consider more complex causal changes, then the problem becomes even more concerning. Droughts and floods are the main cause of agricultural distress and have resulted in the loss of over 11 billion in agricultural crops in the United States alone in the first decade of this century. On a world scale, the impact is much more dramatic. Droughts impact agricultural productivity, disrupting the annual harvest cycle, affecting prices for agricultural commodities in real time through market speculation and through linear scarcities, rippling through regional and global economies for many months after the drought has ended. And as we have seen in recent months, this in turn results in the potential for the deep destabilization of entire nation states as food riots and other reactions driven by fear of shortage and even starvation increase in frequency. And as a New York Times article noted on Sunday, this is happening from Mexico to Uzbekistan, from Haiti to Yemen, and on and on. So setting ideology aside, I think we can all agree that we're facing a problem of daunting magnitude. So what can we as teachers, researchers, and practitioners do? We're meeting today at one of America's finest premier land-grant universities. The values upon which this great institution was founded and that are reflected in institutions of like nature across the country, including my own, provide what I think is an excellent starting point for our conversation. Graham Spanier, president of Penn State University, once noted that surely the establishment of the American Land-Grant University, with its tripartite mission of teaching, research, and service, is the single most important development in the history of our higher education. This next year, we will celebrate the 150th anniversary of the passage of the Morrill Act that created the American Land-Grant University system. The system was conceived during one of the darkest periods of American history. Our country was embroiled in a tragic and costly civil war. Yet even in that perilous time, President Abraham Lincoln and leaders of Congress had the vision, the courage, and the foresight to pass the Morrill Act, thereby setting aside areas in each of our states for the establishment of a university designed to bring higher education to the people, and more specifically to the children of the agricultural and working classes. In the midst of what was clearly one of the most difficult chapters of our history, these visionary leaders recognized the irreplaceable value of a well-educated populace for our country's economic and democratic future. I want to suggest to you today that as much as ever before, we must turn again to these institutions to assist us in addressing the challenges that I have described, challenges that threaten the well-being of our nation and of the world. As all of you in this room will understand, that part of the genius of the land-grant system was the establishment of a tripartite focus on teaching, research, and service. Just as this model is so critical in helping build one of the world's most successful economies and political systems, it can be equally significant in helping us address the issues that I'm describing today. Let me reflect with you for just a few moments on the ways in which this might be done by referring to the three legs of the land-grant stool. I will offer just a few examples. Each of you could think of many more. First of all, the first leg of teaching. In our instructional programs at our universities, we can reaffirm a commitment to developing a generation of citizens who are more knowledgeable about environmental problems and their causes and consequences, and less prone to fall back on conventional wisdom, misinformation, and political rhetoric. Developing a curriculum that recognizes the importance of doing this across academic colleges and departments will be absolutely essential. Secondly, beyond our educational role that extends to all of our students, we can develop and support new initiatives with the goal of training a next generation of scientists and policymakers who will have the skill sets to lead efforts to address the challenging problems of society, natural resource interfaces. Thirdly, because sustainability has become today's freedom crusade, we can teach how to pursue more sustainable technologies and development paths. If we fail to do that, in Friedman's words, the next generation will not live free. We have become rich by depleting our natural stocks, water, hydrocarbons, forests, rivers, fish, and arable land. We must teach that such a course is unsustainable. And next to our research programs. Increasingly, we're dependent upon the research faculty of our institutions of higher education to find new and better ways to address these problems. Water, air quality, energy, and food are all essential for the survival of our species, and our institutions are now the primary source of new discoveries in each of these areas. In this context, the research leg of the land-grant stool takes on ever-increased importance. And just as this is essential in our teaching efforts, finding solutions to big problems will increasingly require interdisciplinary collaborative work. Again, a hallmark of our research universities. We must, as leaders of these institutions, continue to develop incentives